Hello, everyone. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of what class will be like tonight. Again, I do apologize for having to record online classes, cause last minute changes in a senior's life from what I'm learning. Those that are online seem to get a different set of instructions and they do not come on time, so I apologize. But let's start for tonight. First tonight, we will be talking about your award-winning projects, and we will kind of be flipping instruction for that. So I will explain that and what that looks like in just a few moments. We'll also be talking about traditional literature tonight and defining those different areas that fit that different category and talking about lots of different examples of those. And get your Padlets ready and get your search engines ready. You're going to be searching for some of those tonight as we go over them and adding them to a Padlet. Even though we're recording, we'll definitely do some things that I hope will engage you and you can do during class. Okay, so I want to make sure you know that you're welcome to do that during instruction, just like we would do in class, and add those to the Padlet. And I promise I'll make it a little clearer as we're moving forward. We're also going to talk tonight about what makes a good Newbery award-winning book, or what makes a Newbery good. Why do we want to look at those Newbery books? So we'll be diving into that a little bit deeper, and you'll be asked to do an answer garden and have a little information on Padlets with that as well. So let's jump into our class for today. And let's start out with what I expect for your award-winning presentations. So we're going to ask everyone tonight to kind of flip your instruction. So on your Canvas page for today, it will indicate to you to please review at least 3 projects from your classmates and answer a few questions. So, just give 1 or 2 sentences as feedback. And let's actually go there real quickly and see what that looks like. If I look at your assignment, you'll notice that it says Flipped Award Winning Presentation Review, and I've given you a link to the Padlet. I've also asked you to put some comments under at least 3 of your classmates. So what do I mean by that? I mean by maybe give 1 or 2 sentences total. I don't expect a book, but just give them a few constructive comments, things that might include the usefulness of this particular project that you've put together. Maybe its connection with content, or how you might like its design and that it might be easy to follow, or how it could be used in your library program. Basically, does it make you want to read a book that has this award? Have you learned anything from that? So that's what we're kind of going to be expecting you to do. And when you look at this today, you'll notice everyone's done a very good job, I think, thus far of putting their books and kind of answering the questions that we ask you to do about that. And so I want you to kind of click through, again, just pick 3. Most of you already have them uploaded. You've been working hard. I believe even if these have this kind of image, once you click on them, as long as it still allows you to open them, you'll be just fine. If you have trouble opening it, please put that information down there. And to comment, all you have to do is you can click the button there to say you like it, if you like it, and you will be able to just put your comments there. Just remember, once you're finished, to make sure that you click this little arrow, or therefore it will not be there. Okay, let me delete that because it looks a little Swedish, doesn't it? If you have any questions about how to comment on your classmates or how I'm flipping this project sharing opportunity, just let me know. I will be at my computer all day tomorrow and I will be able to answer your questions. Okay. All right. So if you'll remember, last time we met, we talked a little bit about the trends in a picture book. We talked about the fact that what children and parents are interested in finding books for their children now, that those books need to include books about other cultures, books about other folk in different places, in different countries, right? Basically diversity. This could also be about how children are in America, right? When we say diversity, that doesn't always mean a different country. Diversity could also mean lots of things. So it could be those that are differently abled. It could also be those that live in America, but have a history somewhere else, right? It could be a religious history as well. So it's all about diversity, not just race, not just nationality, but all different kinds of things. But that's what people, and that's what parents, and that's what children are interested in. They want to learn those windows and doors. They want to learn about others. Also, they're looking for books that have strong female characters. If we look at the last few book series movies that have come out, have you noticed a trend? Several years ago, when the Hunger Games came out, when Divergent series came out, they were looking for those strong female characters. That hasn't changed. You'll see that in the literature that's coming out now, as well as in the movies that have been made from that literature. Kid-friendly nonfiction is also a very important piece that our students are looking for. They're looking for that nonfiction that they could be able to use. That kid-friendly nonfiction is that we kind of talked about last week, where you have National Geographic for kids, right? We have nonfiction at all levels. Poetry is something we will be talking about next week, but definitely still an important type of literature that children are interested in. And then those iconic series and characters. There are new stories in every series, so they get attached to a character and they want to keep reading what's going to happen to that character in different situations. And we think of that more in early chapter books when we've talked about Jack and Annie books, or the Magic Treehouse books, or Geronimo Stilton. But we can also think about series books in your picture books. Think about your Fancy Nancy books. Think about Pete the Cat, right? Children enjoy those characters. They want to read and understand how they're going to react in different different situations. Also think, oh my, we've got the Cat in the Hat and Berenstain Bears. It's not a new philosophy. It's just one of those things that's an indicator of a good reader. Children are also interested in those fantasy worlds and fantasy creatures. Think about the most popular literature that some of you noted in your flip grid that are still very popular today, that talk about those fantasy worlds and creatures. And then it is always just timeless, those scary books that they like to find. And the hard thing for our children is to be able to find those effectively in your online catalogs. They can't just type in scary books and a list pop up, right? So make sure if you're in a school library, you're putting together a collection that has all those different scary books in it. If you're in the public library, you may need to help your patrons understand the best way to search to find those kinds of stories that they're looking for. So always a hot topic and something that they enjoy. Today, we're going to look at some traditional literature. Let me switch my camera over very quickly. All right. So how many of you, just in your mind there, remember Stone Soup? Anybody? Stone Soup is one of those books that is not new. It's been around forever, right? And it is a book that is a great indicator of traditional literature. If I kind of try to define that, I would say that they provide insights into the underlying values and beliefs of a particular cultural group. And they also provide opportunities for comparisons across different cultures. So when we look at Stone Soup today, we're going to look at two different versions. The older version that you might remember, which is also a Caldecott Award winner, and a new version by John J. Muth that features a different culture in it. So we'll be looking at those in just a few minutes. If I were to talk about the traditional Stone Soup that many of you may remember, as it was actually, I want to say, they do a good job. Yep, 1948 Caldecott Award winner. That's why I said most of you probably remember it. It really is talking about these soldiers. So I can get there. There are these three soldiers, and they kind of outwit some greedy townspeople with the creation of a special soup. And it's really built with what they had, which is basically stones. That's all they brought to the table. But they talked with the people in the village into contributing to this soup. And really, it's about teaching people to work together. for the better of the whole community, right? But they kind of tricked them into doing so. So the three soldiers, and this is a book based in France, right, during this war, they walk to the town, and when the people see them in the town, they all kind of hide away in their houses, and they have nothing to share, nothing to contribute. They're war ridden, right? They're hungry, they're tired, they don't have enough for themselves, and they don't really feel like they can take care of others. But they kind of do their thing, and they say, we know how to make stone soup. So as they're making the stone soup, they talk people into what they might have that they could contribute. They might have water, they may have, here they are putting in the stones, they may have salt and pepper, or I have a few carrots I can spare. And so everybody brings a little bit along. And this is a great story to sequence with your students. If you wanted to start with what came in the pot first, if you have one of those interactive boards for your story time or for your classes, the kids you have them up, everything lined up at the bottom of the screen. They can just drag it into the pot and stir. It's all about layering if you're dealing with their programming. But they can put things in order. But what happens in the end, I bet you can guess. Good book talk never gives away the ending. Well, this one was first published in 1947, and it's a classic that has remained one of Marcia Brown's most popular and enduring books. It is about those hungry soldiers. So I'm really pointing that out because you're going to have to tell me what aligns with this next story here in a few moments. But it is definitely a French tale, something that happened in France. Well, now we have a remake of that, okay? In this book, Stone Soup by John J. Muth, it's going to talk about three hungry monks. So where do you think we're going to be when we talk about this? Okay, they're tired, they're hungry, and not soldiers necessarily, but they're passing through a village that's been dealing with a drought. They've been dealing with their own set of challenges. So the challenge may differ, but the concept, the lesson that we're trying to teach is very much the same. And something I really like to do in this book is talk about the author's note. And that's very important in this particular book. And then we're going to go over the things that they may have in common here in just a moment. So look with me at John J. Muth's Stone Soup. And for this particular book, we're going to start at the very back with the author's note. And you can choose how you want to do this, whether you want to start with the author's note or you want to start with the book. But since I'm dealing with adults, I chose today to start with the author's note. And then as I read the book tonight, I want you to look for those particular pieces that the author tells us about as we're going through. Many times we will have a whole new insight to what a book means just by reading the author's note. And it's not always appropriate for students to read for themselves unless they're a higher level reader, but it's definitely something as the storyteller, as the person who's sharing the book, that you definitely read ahead of time so that you may want to bring some of those components out. But Stone Soup has its traditional roots in European folklore. There are many versions of the story which have been tracked back to France, to Sweden, Russia, England, Belgium, other countries. In the most familiar versions of the story, the soup is made from stones, but in others, it has been made from a nail or an axe, even buttons made of bone. There are also related stories from Jamaica about a soup making pot, or Korea about a magic cake tree. And this is my favorite one. We could all use this one. And from the Philippines about a bill paying hat. In this retelling, John J. Muth took the traditional form of the book Stone Soup and he set it in China. He used the Buddha story tradition, where tricksters spread enlightenment rather than seeking gain for themselves. The characters Hawk, Lock, and Su, and it also gives pronunciation, are prominent in Chinese folklore. They are three deities that bestow health, wealth, and prosperity. So we kind of get a history to this. Hawk symbolizes good fortune and prosperity. Lock symbolizes good health, family, happiness, and mutual love. And Su, he symbolizes longevity and brings good health and long life, free from stress and obstacles. We could all use that. In this story, they have taken the form of three Zen monks. In the artwork that you're going to see in the book, there are symbols from Eastern culture which have specific meaning. A long time ago in China, the color of the sun, yellow, was worn only by royalty. And while the little girl in yellow in our story is not an empress, she is someone quite exceptional. The willows at the very end of the story are a sign of parting. And there are things to find all throughout this book, such as the noodles shaped like Chinese word for to teach. So you're going to look for that. And a pile of three stones, which form the shape of a sitting Buddha. That's the second thing you'll look for. There are also two instruments the musicians play that are called the erhu and the pipa. The uru is the one on the right. So this is a strategy to always help students when you're reading a higher level book. If you can give them things to look for and listen for throughout your story, and then they can give you a thumbs up symbol when they found that, that just makes it a little more interactive and way for them to contribute to part of that story. There have always been Zen poet monks wandering through cloud-embraced mountains, and it seems to me, John says, that they have at least one found a village with sad houses and done just what Hawk, Lock, and Sue have done here. All right, excuse me. Let's get started with stone soup. Remember what you're looking for throughout the story. I'm also going to ask you if this fits our definition of what traditional literature is. Let's see if I can get it all on here. Three monks, Hawk, Lock, and Sue, traveled along a mountain road. They talked about cat whiskers, the color of the sun, and they talked about giving. What makes one happy, Sue? Asked Hawk, the youngest monk. Old Sue, who was the wisest, said, let's find out. So if you can look at the picture here, you'll notice that all three monks are very different ages. So that might be important. Also, I want you to look at, do you notice a lot of color? It's really kind of muted tones, isn't it? That might be important. The sound of a bell brought their gaze to the rooftops of the village below. So here they are at the top. They're looking down on this village way down here. They could not see from so high above that the village had been through many hard times. Famine, floods, and war had made the villagers weary and untrusting of strangers. They had even become suspicious of their neighbors. Could you imagine that would be similar to Marcia Brown's version? The villagers worked hard, but only for themselves. There was a farmer. There was a scholar. There was a tea merchant. There was also a seamstress, a doctor, and a carpenter, as well as many others. But they had very little to do with one another. Ooh, look at this. They're at the gate, aren't they? When the monks reached the foot of the mountain, the villagers disappeared into their houses. No one came to the gates to greet them. And when the people saw them enter the village, they closed up their windows tight. I think that's what also happened in the other version. The monks knocked on the door of the first house. There was no answer. Then the house went dark. They knocked on the door of a second house, and the same thing happened. It happened again and again, from one house to the next. These people do not know happiness, they all agreed. But today, said Sue, his face bright as the moon, we will show them how to make stone soup. Now, I do have a question. Remember from our author's note what color they said the color of royalty was? So if we find a little glimpse of that color, we might find that we find a very important character in our book. Anybody see who's in the window there? It's kind of hidden from so far away, but I think she's going to be important. Do you see her again? They gathered twigs and branches and made a fire. They placed a small tin pot on top and filled it with water from the village well. See who's hiding over here? Yeah, she's watching, isn't she? The brave little girl who had been watching came to them. What are you doing? She asked. We are gathering twigs, said Locke. We are making a fire, said Hawk. We are making stone soup, and we need 3 round, smooth stones, said Sue. So this might be a good opportunity to actually do a science connection and connect with some different synonyms and different minerals and what types of rocks could be considered round and smooth. What would make them round and smooth? We could definitely make some connections to your rocks and mineral science there. The little girl helped the monks look around the courtyard until they found just the right ones. They put them in the water to cook. Anybody think what from our author's note this might resemble? I'll let you think about it. These stones will make excellent soup, said Sue. But this very small pot won't make much, I'm afraid. My mother has a bigger pot, says the girl. Look at that pot. Her mother did have a larger pot, didn't she? The little girl ran home and she started to take a pot. Her mother asked what she was doing. The 3 strangers are making soup from stones, she said, and they need our biggest pot. Said the girl's mother. Stones are easy to come by. I'd like to learn how to make stone soup. The monks poked the coals. As the smoke drifted up, the neighbors started to peer out of their windows. The fire and the large pot in the middle of the village was a true curiosity. One by one, the people of the village came out to see just what this stone soup was. Well, of course, old style stone soup should be well seasoned with salt and pepper, said Hawk. That's true, said Locke, as he stirred the giant pot filled with water and stones, but we have none. I have some salt and pepper, said the scholar, his eyes big with curiosity, and he disappeared and came back with salt and pepper and even a few other spices. Sue took a taste. The last time we had soup stones of this size and color, carrots made the broth very sweet. Carrots, said a woman from the back. I may have a few carrots, but just a few, mind you. And off she ran. She returned with as many carrots as she could carry and dropped them into the pot. Do you think it would be better with onions? Asked Hawk. Oh, yes, maybe an onion would taste good, said a farmer. And he hurried off. He returned in a moment with 5 big onions and he dropped them into the bubbling pot. Now that is some fine soup, he said. The villagers all nodded their heads and the smell was so good. But if we had some mushrooms, said Sue, rubbing his chin. Several villagers licked their lips. A few dashed away and returned with fresh mushrooms, noodles, pea pods, and cabbages. This is one of my favorite pictures in the book. See their heads all looking inside the pot. Something magical began to happen among the villagers. As each person opened their heart to give, the next person gave even more. And as this happened, the soup grew richer and smelled more delicious. I imagine the emperor would suggest we add dumplings, said one villager. And bean curd, said another. What about cloud ear and mung beans and yams, cried some others. And taro root and winter melon and baby corn, cried other villagers. Garlic, ginger root, soy sauce, lily buds. I have some, people cried out, and off they ran, returning with all they could carry. The monks stirred and the pot bubbled. How good it smelled and how good it would taste. How loving and giving the villagers had become. Now, think about this in different cultures and how the ingredients in the soup might change. So you may have them maybe put together a recipe for what they think might be a stone soup in their particular area. Oh, look at this picture. Do we see color? Remember the beginning of the book, how kind of colorless it is? And look where we are now. At last, the soup was ready. The villagers gathered together. They brought rice and steamed buns. They brought lychee nuts and sweet cakes. They brought tea to drink, and they lit lanterns. Everyone sat down to eat. They had not been together for a feast like this for as long as anyone could remember. Kind of reminds me of what we did before the pandemic versus what we do now. Oh, here's our young girl again, who was so important in getting everything started when she trusted them to bring the pot, right? After the banquet, they told stories, sang songs, and celebrated long into the night. Anybody see the instruments that it may be talked about in the author's note? We see puppets. That's also a symbol of their culture. They even unlocked their doors and took the monks into their homes and gave them very comfortable places to sleep. Oh, look at this. We've still got all this color going on. And here are the willow branches that he talks about in his author's note. In the gentle spring morning, everyone gathered together near the willows to say farewell. Thank you for having us as your guests, said the monks. You have been most generous. Thank you, said the villagers. With the gifts you have given, we will all have plenty. You have shown us that sharing makes us all richer. And to think, said the monks, to be happy is as simple as making stone soup. The end. Okay, so I've told you a little bit about Marcia Brown's stone soup from 1948, I think I said, 1949, 48. And today, John J. Muth's version of stone soup. All right, so if I think about these, they have a lot in common, don't they? Did they pretty much have the same plot, no matter if they were from Europe or from China? They had the same idea. They had the same actions. So the characters were doing the same thing. In both versions, they were making soup, right? They also had similar characters. In Marcia Brown's version, they had 3 soldiers that came through. And in John J. Muth's version, they had 3 monks. So they had characters that were going to town to do the same thing. Their settings were similar, just different in their country, right? They were both going to a small village. And they were very similar in their literary style, their theme, and they both have the same kind of lesson that they teach, and that they should all what? Work together, right? They learn more when they can share and work together. So when we think about traditional literature, it may have lots of different versions. You will see lots of different versions of Cinderella from all different countries. I meant to bring a few copies and I only brought one today. But they come from all different worlds, all different cultures, but they kind of have the same lesson that they're teaching in the end. So different versions of traditional literature would include things like fairy tales, folk tales, fables, myths, legends, and religious literature, right? Religious books, picture books. And we're going to talk about those as we're moving forward. Want to make sure you kind of understand that definition and how they work together. These are those similar stories that started out as an oral history and then have been passed down from generation to generation and written down eventually, right? And then changed for different cultures. Oh, there was my read aloud. So what I want you to do for me today, and I'm going to leave on my document camera because if you could see my desk, you would know I have all kinds of examples stacked up already. But I want to share with you what I'm expecting you to do. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to be going over this nice little table here that is a good definition of different types of traditional literature, right? Those oral stories that are passed down over time and can be found in lots of different cultures. They're timeless and they're kind of placeless. They could happen in many different places. So I'm going to kind of go over these. As I'm going over them, you will notice that there is a header here for all of the different categories I'm going over. And what I'm going to expect you to do by the time we meet next time in class, because we'll kind of review it together, is I'm going to expect you to add one example of a fairy tale, one example of a fable, and I will ask on the fable, what is the lesson that they're trying to teach? So you might not only have to enter something here, you also have to tell us what they're trying to teach. Then we have the myths, we have legends, tall tales, and those religious stories. And I've kind of started everything off with a few examples. And as I'm going over them, I will go over these examples. But don't forget, I expect you to add one thing to every category, okay? And I will give you just kind of a real quick lesson here. At the top, I'd like for you to put the title of the book and who it's by. And then one of the nice things, remember the search feature here? You could actually search images, GIF images, YouTube, or the web for a particular title. So let me see, I was going under myths here. So let's look at, I'm going to look for, I'm going to use my same example. I don't want to take one of yours. If I type that in, of course I can't spell today, then you would easily be able to come in. It's going to give you images here. If you click on GIFs, you'll see GIFs from that particular story. You can go to YouTube. Unfortunately, these are the movie, not the book, right? This one might be a book talk. Yep. This is actually a book review. Spotify, and you can search the web. So I'm happy with either one of these. Many people like to put the book talk there. So if you want to do that, that'll help the next person. But if you also want to just put an image of that, you're welcome to do so. I will ask for you to do the book more so than the movies if they have a movie. So try to keep that in mind as well. And then it will populate right up here. I actually have a book trailer linked for this particular myth so that you can get an idea of what that might be as we're moving forward. So just to make sure you understand the requirements for us, your job is going to be to add one thing under each category as we go over them. All right. The first thing we're going to talk about really quickly here is we're going to talk about the different criteria to evaluate traditional literature. And so let's talk about first the things that you see on the screen. Number one, does the tale reflect a narrative storytelling style? So is it just telling us about history, or is it in a story style, right? That's what we're looking for each one of these. Also think about, does the tale, does the story preserve the sound and feel of the culture or the country of its origin? Think about when they were China, they used the monks. When they were in France, they used the soldiers. Think about what fits their culture, right? What fits the origin of that country. We also need to think about, do the illustrations match the tone and the text and help people or help the reader to capture the essence of that culture. Are they learning from that? Especially with our fables, what's the lesson or moral that they're picking up from that? And does the tale employ a rich literary style? I think about, for instance, in this book of Stone Soup, what was the piece that I told you about was so important to help us look a little deeper into that story and take it to the next level? Yep, it was that author's note at the very back of the book. So sometimes the author will include those in their story as they're doing that. So if you'll notice, our table today that I want to share with you breaks it down into some similarities between these different stories. So you're going to notice the characters, the settings, the problem, and the solution. All of these will be looked at under the fairy tales category: fables, myths, legends, tall tales. All right. So let's start out with fairy tales. And I have a few to share with you. One of my favorites, I talked to you a little bit earlier about Mufaro's beautiful daughters. I'm sorry, about Cinderella. This is an African tale that's the same Cinderella story, right? You will find this is by John Steptoe, and this is one of my favorite examples of a fairy tale. It definitely talks about the culture that we were talking about earlier. If I look at the characters, they are dealing with royalty. You'll notice that when we look at fairy tales, it's usually dealing with kings and queens. It may also have animals that play a role. Another one that I want to bring up is the Tale of Despereaux, which is more for your 4th and 5th grade readers in that upper piece, an illustrated book. But it is the tale, it deals also with royalty and with animals, right? It usually, as far as its setting goes, it's going to have a castle or a forest of some kind. That's one reason I'm talking about Cinderella. We all know that story. The problem is good versus evil. And the solution may include magic. It may also end with they lived happily ever after, right? So when you think about fairy tales, everybody take a moment. Think about your favorite fairy tale. Kind of put that in your head. When you're done, remember, I want you to come to our Padlet, and underneath fairy tales, I want you to add a few or add one. You must add at least one, right? So some examples that I have here besides Mufaro's beautiful daughters, and you can go here and listen to the read aloud or the book talk. I think this is a read aloud if you would like to learn a little bit more about that one on your own time. Another one of my favorites is a retelling of Red Riding Hood that's from China, Lon Popo. You can also, this is a video, you're welcome to listen to that story as well. And one of my, another favorite, let me just put it that way, is Petite Rouge. It's a Cajun Red Riding Hood story. And I always, with students, still use the recording of this book. When I purchased this book for myself, it actually had a CD in it, if that tells you anything. And it would have the story, because the dialect is so strong in that, I did not feel like I could do it justice. So I would work with that story and have the kids there. This is also where you might include different and various fractured fairy tales. Fractured fairy tales are where they've taken a classic and they've kind of added a twist to it. Maybe they're changing the characters, made them more modern. Think about language and setting. A lot of these are taking place in the digital world, so you'll find some of those and some superhero connections to our fairy tales. So check out your fractured fairy tales there. That's also a link to take you to a good article there. But I expect you to add your favorite fairy tale book that's here. Now, I will ask, try not to find those that are cartoon based or are movie based. We're really looking for literature when in the books that you share. My goal is for this to be a tool you can add to your toolbox that you may want to take and add these different titles to your literature log, things like that. So take some time, find your fairy tale that you might want to add there. All right. In class, here's where I'd give you a few minutes to kind of think. Next, let's talk about some fables. well, here was our Lone Popo book from the other one. All right. When we think of fables, we think of animals acting like people, right? One of the things that comes to my mind is the tortoise and the hare. What was the lesson that was learned in that? Slow and steady what? Slow and steady wins the race. That's right. So that's kind of the lesson it's trying to teach. I'm supposed to wait till a few minutes for that, but it's all right. It's generally taking place outside somewhere. My favorite version of this one is actually by Janet Stevens. It's The Tortoise and the Hare by them. You'll see that on the Padlet. And it's only usually trying to solve only one problem, and it uses trickery to do so. Another great example is Anansi Tales from a Different Culture, right? And this is a Caldecott honor book. And this is the tale, Anansi the Spider. I bet many of you have heard about Anansi. If you haven't, definitely worth checking it out. So if I bring over our Padlet, this is where under the fables, you will find your favorite fable. You will enter the book there. There's my favorite version of The Tortoise and the Hare. And you'll notice you put the lesson that it's trying to teach to your book. Another one of my favorites from them is Tops and Bottoms by Janet Stevens. That's another example by the same author. It has a lesson that it's trying to teach. If you have not read Tops and Bottoms, it's a wonderful book to do when you're talking about this time of year. If you're talking about plants, it talks about the plants that grow under the ground. It talks the plants that grow above the ground as far as the fruit, where you harvest the fruit of the plant. So under the ground would be root vegetables like carrots, right? Turnips, things like that, potatoes. It talks about things that grow on top of the ground, right? Maybe lettuce, tomatoes, celery. And then it talks about the things in the middle that you might harvest. Think about corn, right? And so you can imagine this hare is tricking this bear into what they get to harvest. So if you haven't read Tops and Bottoms, just a really fun book, definitely a cute take on a fable and teaches a lesson. This is also a read aloud, so check it out. I think you will be impressed. But I want you to give me an example of a fable. Remember, you can use this little picture right here to help you remember what qualifies as a fable and add that to it. Okay. All right. Next, let's talk a little bit about myths. My example for a myth is going to be Percy Jackson, right? This is for your upper level reader, not a new read, but myths usually deal with gods and goddesses. Now you are going to find lots of books on this, but think about ones that your children might read now. Another example that I have is this graphic novel on African myths. So it is actually a list of several different myths, right? It gives the origins here at the beginning, where myths came from, and then it's going to jump into each of several different stories that you can check out and learn a little bit more on your own. Okay, so definitely a myth that deals with gods and goddesses of some sort. It doesn't really have a specific setting. It could happen in lots of different places, lots of different universes, lots of different worlds, because we are dealing with gods and goddesses. But it usually, as far as the problem goes, they explain something that happens in nature by using these gods and goddesses. And they usually have, you know, good is rewarded and the bad is punished throughout time. Think about your Percy Jackson story, right? This is definitely an updated version of a myth because it takes those same characters that we have heard of as far as mythology goes, but it puts a twist on them and it puts it in our current day, really, right? It's taking it and putting it in a current high school in a city that kids have heard of. The solution could be magical. It could include the unusual creatures that you hear about in a lot of these different stories. And it can also teach us a lesson. So think about when you're coming up with your myth to put on the Padlet, what version you might want to come up with. Try to find those that are current, those that kids could connect to, and maybe it's a graphic novel like this African myth book. Excellent. All right, let's see. I think those are the best examples I had there. Yep. And don't forget, if you want to hear a really good book talk or book trailer rather about Lightning Thief, you can click here and actually watch that. That'll be an example of something you'll be creating for one of your literature immersion assignments. All right, let's take a minute and let's learn about legends. The legend of the Indian paintbrush is absolutely one of my favorite little legends. Tommy DePola actually writes a whole series on different Native American legends, and they're a little easier to find, honestly. You'll see lots of those. But these are generally about everyday people and animals, potentially. They can definitely be the main characters. As far as the setting goes, they're also not specific. It could be anywhere. And the problem in these books usually explains how or why something in nature came to be. So in the legend of the Indian paintbrush, it's talking about a specific flower, right? That's what they're talking about and how they get those colors. And the solutions are generally magic, and sometimes they also teach a lesson. So you notice that some of these categories are going to overlap, and that's totally fine. You may find books in one category and think they belong in another. A good example of that is this particular book, which is John Henry. John Henry is a great legend. I love this version by that's illustrated by Jerry Pinkney, one of my favorite illustrators. It's by Julia Lester. But this is definitely the legend of John Henry, but he could also be a tall tale depending on how the story is spun, right? So when we talk about legends, we need to think about books that could also fit into our tall tales because they could easily go back and forth. Tall tales are written about everyday people who seem to have superhuman abilities, don't they? So we're going to talk about that next. I do want to share with you another good example here. When we talk about tall tales, you notice I have John Henry over here. He could easily slide over to the legends category and be in both places. So if you found one book and another person has put it in one of these other categories, sometimes they can overlap. I know that can be a little frustrating, but you can always look at our chart and kind of see those things that overlap. One book I do want you to check out is, and here's a little book talk by that, is Tristan Strong. In this book, it takes a modern day character who kind of travels back in time to meet John Henry. So this is a modern version of a tall tale or a legend, and how that is influencing this young character to do things a little differently, right? That's what we want our books to do, is do that. Another good example of a tall tale is, let me bring it up here, Library Lil. If we look at tall tales, they're usually linked to a real historical time period. They also have problems that are solved in usually a very humorous way. And they have exaggerated details. Does that surprise you? Think about, your uncle maybe has gone fishing and, the fish is really this big, but when they're finished, the fish is like this big. But they exaggerate the details, and it tells us about a person's accomplishments generally. Sometimes tall tales, and I'm going to show you 3 or 4 examples here, can be almost a biography. This one, Stephen Kellogg actually did a series, and Library Lil I just had to share because it's about a librarian that you can check out. You notice here it's video, so you can check it out for yourself. But another good example might be Johnny Appleseed. This one is that tall tale retold and illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. He did a series of these. Another really good one illustrated by Kadir Nelson is Thunder Rose. And it is another tall tale that talks about a real person in history, right? It's going to talk about their accomplishments. It's also going to give some exaggerated details. So remember, these stories were passed down over time orally. sitting around a campfire. Maybe merchants would travel from one village to another village or one town to another town. And as they went, they told their stories. And they never told it quite the same each time. They kept trying to make it more and more interesting. So these tall tales, that's where they were born. They were born from that oral language that spread over time. So think about your tall tales, think about your favorites, and look up a tall tale to add at the bottom of your tall tales category. Okay, remember when we're finished, this will be a nice tool for everyone to have some books to choose from. The last little section I have here for you, and I only was able to grab one of these books, the others were checked out, is another one by Jerry Pinkney, and it fits our religious category. And this one's Noah's Ark, right? But when we think about religious stories, we don't only think about one religion, we might also think about others. So The Proudest Blue talks about a young girl and her journey to where she is going to be, right? And what she wears her dress for. And you can play this video to learn a little bit more about that book. Another great example, and I've told you before, Kadir Nelson is one of my favorite illustrators here, but The Whole World in His Hands is another example of a religious story. So I want to see what you come up with in this particular category. So take some time once the recording is over for tonight and add to each one of those categories in your in the Padlet. This is generally where I would have you come and we would talk about them in class, talk about them with your shoulder partners, but this is where we're going to be with this today. Another piece I want to talk to you about are the illustrations in these books, right? Using images to help the reader understand, to help the reader connect with the story. Think about The Wolf in the Snow. That book was a wordless picture book for the most part, but it can still, images can also help the reader decode. They can also bring that visual meaning to words as they're learning to read. We've learned we can have a book of images with no words. You know, in The Tale of Despereaux, for the most part, or in Percy Jackson here, we can have a book with all words and no pictures. But the best connection we can make for students is when we add the images, right? When we add images and words together, then we can help the students even more understand how to decode, understand what connections they can make with the characters. It's kind of the best in both worlds, depending on the level that our students are on, right? My notes say here that reading materials that involve both images and text are involving the whole child. It's important because children's lives include more than just text. They are accumulations of experiences with shapes and lines, with textures and experiences, right? Thus, it makes sense that text becomes more memorable and easier to learn from when they make connections to these tactile and visual experiences that these children already have and live in their day-to-day lives. So that's why it's so important to involve both. One of my favorite things, and this brings us back to the legends I was talking about, or the tall tales, is oral histories and storytelling. Telling stories through images of words that storytellers have done throughout the ages. They may not bring lots of things with them, right? They may not bring lots of props, although I'm asking you to do this with your book talks, but they bring things to the table, the inflection of their voice, maybe what they're wearing, possibly just a stick, right, that they can use as an indicator for a particularly important part of a story. I have seen Donna Washington. She's a local storyteller here in North Carolina, an author actually from Durham. And she says that it doesn't matter what your cultural background is, that these stories make sense if we're all going to live in the same place together, which I think is wonderful. And we as librarians, we as school librarians, public librarians, anyone who deals with picture books and children, we are doing what? Right? We have to be a storyteller. We have to bring that book to life. If we're holding it up, if we're pointing out the different pieces of it, as I did with Stone Soup today, all of those things are extremely important. One of my favorite storytellers is Pura Belpré. You heard that name before? Anybody make a connection? Pura Belpré is an award that some of you have done your award-winning projects on. But she is a very important person that it was named after, right? And so we're going to watch this little video. I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but there's something really important in this that I feel like you'll get. It's a little bit slow, so it'll take a minute for you to get to, and it may be a little difficult to listen to. Let me share my sound to interpret, because it's not all in English. So you'll have to listen very closely. But they've written this beautiful book called Planting Stories, The Life of a Librarian and Storyteller, Pura Belpré. And it was actually award winner last year. And you'll notice it gives the history of her. It's really a biography. And it talks about her journey from Puerto Rico, I believe, to America. Here's her journey and what she did. She actually worked as a seamstress, and across the road from her place that she worked was a public library. And she loved going in there. And I want you to look how kind of plain this library looks, right? Well, she eventually started working there, and she was an amazing storyteller. See her here? And she told stories to the students, and the books came to life. And one of the statements I want you to listen to, I actually have this quote sitting up by my desk. It says, "It is a fundamentally unique experience to read about characters that you can identify with." And that was kind of her philosophy. She would tell these stories and help children of her same culture and others from different cultures learn about the history and the stories that were passed down through time. And she eventually brought puppets to her library, and you'll notice the library actually came to life. She became an author, and she still shares them today. And here she was actually honored, and it talks just about the rest of her life, what she did after she became an author, after her husband passed away. But you see the impact that she left on this library. If we look at the other page, it was just a quiet, kind of dull place. And now look at the life that's going on in the library. Lots of librarians using puppets, lots of librarians sharing stories. So it just kind of the seeds that she planted and left behind. So if you get a chance to read Planting Stories, it's a great connection to the Pura Belpré Award. But I do want you to take just a moment and listen to, it's not but about 3 minutes, this video, and see if you kind of understand where these stories came from and why the Pura Belpré Award is named after her. Oops.
Forget she was a librarian. Forget that she was a writer of children's books. She was an educator. She was born with that.
She had the gift of a voice that was unbelievable.
Narraba sobre todo para niños y sabía que había que pintar con las palabras, decirlo de tal modo de que el niño pudiera imaginar ese suceder.
The first story that I heard from my grandmother's lips was La Cucarachita Martina y El Ratoncito Pérez. Pereza Martina has been my golden key. It's been opening doors for me everywhere.
You read these stories, it's a different experience than reading Hans Christian Andersen or reading The Brothers Grimm. Perez and Martina is hysterical. It's hysterical, but it has a really brutal and horrible ending. It is just a fundamentally unique experience to read about characters that you can identify with.
The audiences were they hungered
for this.
Every child deserves to be able to see his family, his community, himself, herself validated. At the same time, they all need windows. They need to know about other worlds.
She brought people to the magical folk that came from her culture. She was proud of it, and she was beloved.
The fact that she was a pioneer as a librarian, a pioneer as a folklorist, a pioneer with dramatizing her stories, using puppets.
If you just read what she published, you would only have a fraction of a very skewed view of what she was writing. But thank goodness we have her archives here.
So as you can see, she really left a legacy behind. She left a legacy that shows us, and again, my favorite piece, my favorite statement from this particular video is, she left that statement that they were talking about, that it's fundamentally unique experience for children to read about characters that they could identify with. And that's what she did. She was putting down onto paper those oral traditions, those oral stories from her history that the grandmothers had been passing down to their children so kids could connect with those. One of my very favorites that they actually talk about in that particular video just a little bit is Martinina and the Beautiful Cucaracha. If you haven't seen that, that is a wonderful story. Check it out. You'll see some of the characters that she talked about there. All right. Lastly, one of the things that she used was illustrations, as you've heard me talk about earlier today, in defining those different folklore or traditional literature types. One of my favorite illustrators is Kadir Nelson. His work is just amazing. We're going to be talking about him a little bit later. But the intention of illustrations should not be to necessarily create believable worlds, but instead, the vivid and detailed illustrations that illustrators are putting together should promote readers to use their imaginations and create their own interpretation of the reading. Think about Wolf in the Snow, right? We were able to interpret what was going on with that young girl as she was trying to save that wolf pup. There are also different levels of illustrations and purposes in it. When students are learning to read, the use of picture clues are a wonderful tool to help them with their comprehension, right? As the reader increases their abilities, the ability for the pictures and to use them is really there to spark their imagination and less to help them decode. So there's different levels. You know, we talked about that, I think, 2 weeks ago. Through its pictures and other non-textual dimensions, reading materials involve the whole child in learning. It's important because children's lives include more than just text. They are those accumulation of experiences with shapes and lines and letters, right? With textures and things that they can touch. Therefore, it makes sense that text becomes more memorable and easier to learn from when they can make connections to these tactile and visual experiences that children already live with and possess in their day-to-day lives. So think about the illustrations of the books that you're putting in front of students and their ability to be able to do that. All right, let's take for just a moment and talk about what makes a good Newbery. We talked earlier beforehand, or talked in the agenda about things that we were going to look at. And I want us to talk a minute about what makes a good Newbery novel. Now, you were, I think, assigned last week to read this particular article. So I challenge you, if you have not done so yet, make sure that you've read that, because it's going to kind of build on that. And let's kind of just put down a few things that make that. Many of you did your literature immersion assignment on award winners on the Newbery. So let's talk about it. I saw some amazing websites. I saw some great s'mores, great infographics dealing with this, even some wonderful bookmarks that you guys have created, interactive bookmarks. But when we talk about a Newbery novel, the reason it has an award and it has the history, and you guys have looked into that, one of the things it has is strong characters. At the heart of every Newbery is a remarkable character. Think about the Newberys, you know, right? I think about Because of Winn-Dixie, one of my favorites, right? It has that character that we can watch. The Bridge to Terabithia, another really great character that we can follow. More recently, think about the character from the crossover, right? Definitely a strong character that we can follow, that we can get to know, that we can empathize with. Not just a character who carries the weight of the story, but a character original in voice, in spirit, in ideas, and maybe even in how they look, right? But it's certainly original in its imagination. So when you think about a strong Newbery, I want you to think about having a strong character. And one of the things that I'm going to expect you to do is I'm going to expect you to come to this answer garden. You'll see that in the Canvas page. So make sure that you have gone to the Canvas page and you've looked at that, and you'll come here and you'll put what you think a strong Newbery has with it as well. All right, the next thing that you'll notice is setting, right? The setting is that stage in a Newbery. Those books, the stage or the setting of that Newbery is key. It has to be right for the hero or the heroine because it is his or her world. The place can be so integral into the story that it becomes a character in its own right. Newbery authors seem to know this secret, right? They seem to know where they can go, what they can do in this setting field to be able to draw in the story. Also, it moves. Because there is a major characteristic of a Newbery winner, one of the major characteristics of a Newbery is that the storyline moves, right? It keeps it going. We can connect with it. Sometimes in an extremely strong way or a beautiful way. Possibly the stories might move in a delicate way, depends on the content of what's going on, right? The author meets the character somewhere and they send them. They may fly somewhere. They may let the character run through some different experiences that they're going through from here to there, possibly through some really hard times, thinking about the climax of the story, right? At the beginning, the hero may be an orphan, an outsider, adrift, or alone, and they may pick somewhere. They may pick a spot for the hero to find him or herself. They're inevitably, overcoming something, and they feel the wind and this wondrous wings of the Newbery characters, as our textbook talks to us about that, and they move through the stories. Think about Holes and the climax and the character and where they come from, what they experience, where they're going. That story moves very quickly. Somebody actually listed Holes in your Flipgrid as one of your favorite books, I think. Another really fun one that I brought up today for fairy tales is The Tale of Despereaux. That is also a Newbery that I would check out if you have not done so yet. Just really entertaining and has a storyline that moves and you care about the character and you want to see them achieve, right? Another characteristic that makes a good Newbery novel are those arcs of action. Those arcs of action are the powerful beginnings that draw you in. Think about the hook and how quickly have you ever put down a book because the author did not hook you in that first chapter, right? Kids do that all the time. So powerful beginnings that draw a line in the sand for a character, maybe rising middles created by a hero or heroine faced with more and more demanding choices and how they overcome those. Maybe there's a turning point or a climax those moments of decision for the character that they have to do, that at their peaks may well contain a time that they can maybe catch their breath, right? Think about your favorite Newberries and how the author has done this. It makes them really kind of connect to reality and helps you as the reader kind of connect as well. A storytelling arc per se, but also it's not just through outer action. If you think about Linda Sue Parks' A Single Shard, it's also, you know, experiences they're going through. If you think about Holes, it's not just hijacking the water truck and escaping Camp Green Lake that the character goes through. It's all that outside action, the physical action, the essential and fascinating pieces that are happening that drive the reader through the pages of that particular book. And then, speaking of that, there's something that's going to drive the character, something that's going to make them want to go to the next chapter, something that's going to feed their obsession to move further. What's their goal that they're trying to meet, right? So a quality Newbery novel has all of these components, as well as that climactic ending. It's not always a happy ending. I think about The Bridge to Terabithia, for instance, but that climactic ending is one of the huge pieces that makes a quality Newbery novel. Lots of times you'll see them use poetry in this area, and that is how the writer gets to the heart of those Newbery writers, Newbery books, right? They're able to make some kind of connection that's a little deeper. And then finally, imagery. The ability of the author to draw pictures with words, to illustrate a place, an atmosphere, or something that's going on. And they're doing all of that through words. All right. Normally, here's where we would stop. I would ask you to look up and share again the book that you had that was written the year you were born that was a Newbery. And if you had read any that might fit these different characters, what they make you remind you of. If I listed these things, what books really jump out to you that fit those strong characters, the strong setting? It was something that moved throughout. It had not only moved with the character, but also moved the reader to want to read more, right? Those arcs of action, and also that what was driving the character. Can you think about those books that jump out? I mean, here's your formula. I expect you all to write one now and be in that level of the Newbery. All right. I would also stop here and say any questions at this point. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. I will be glad. As I said, I will be at my computer all day tomorrow and glad to answer your questions. Okay. I do want to take a brief moment. June 13th, which if I'm looking at my calendar right, will be next week. Yep, next Monday, you have your Literature Immersion Assignment 3 due. And that is, oh, let me turn on my video. You might want to look at something besides the document camera. Here we go. Your Literature Immersion Assignment 3 is your book talk. Everyone has to do these. I want you to imagine you are sitting, you are at the stacks and a student comes up and they say, hey, I loved Percy Jackson. What should I read next, right? So you're going to do a book talk. You choose the book. I don't care what that is. You can have a real live audience in front of you. If you have a student at the stacks, if you have students sitting in front of you, if you have 3 cats, I don't care. If you can have an audience, that's fine. That'll give you a little bit of experience with that, break the ice a little bit, put you out of your comfort zone. If you don't have an audience, that's okay too. This is kind of a warm up. I want to make sure everyone's comfortable doing a book talk. Now, I do have 2 things that I want you to turn in. You notice it says what to turn in. What I expect you to turn in is not only the video that you create of your book talk, but is also your storyboard. You can also turn this all in with one link. You notice at the top here, this person has actually hyperlinked their book talk to the top of this so that you can turn in one document. I should see your storyboard where you kind of break it out. If you don't want to use a storyboard and you choose to use an outline, I'm okay with that. If you choose to use a script, I'm fine with that too. Although I would prefer you not to use a script, because I want you to be open and just kind of have your ideas flowing and it be a little more spontaneous. So I'm not expecting a script at all, but if you feel more comfortable, that's up to you. So a script, an outline, or a storyboard, either one. I just kind of need to know your plan. So I expect that to be turned in. And again, hyperlinked with your video. You can use your phone for your video. That is just fine. And again, I also encourage you to take all of these, put them on your private YouTube channel that I talked about a few weeks ago, and turn in that link and hyperlink that. You can make it visible only to those with the link if you would like, but I expect you to turn both in. Remember that your book talk is that oral presentation done by you to tell a child about a book that they might be interested in reading in. You don't want to give away the ending. All right, look back at our assignment. There's lots of examples there for you to look at. You don't want to give away the ending. You want to give them a hook to get them started. The goal is for them to want to pick it up and read it, right? So if your take is to say, hey, if you liked reading Percy Jackson, you'll love this, then I need to draw some connections between Percy Jackson and the book I want them to read. If your take is just to tell them about the story, then tell them about the story. It can be a picture book. It can be a chapter book. Either one, I'm totally fine with. I actually have a really cute series I wanted to share with you that just came across my desk. This little series has just come out, and it's an early chapter book for grades 1 through 3 is who they're kind of targeting for that. Cute little series that I might want to book talk sometime, so that others might want to learn more about it. So think about who your audience is, come up with that ahead of time, and all of that will be involved in your storyboard. All right. There are lots of resources there. I also give you in your Canvas course a storyboard template, and I give you lots and lots of examples here. So if you will look at the page, this one was from just a few semesters ago. I think I've shared with you the one from Rachel here. That's a really great example, but you will notice some people are talking to people at the stacks. Others are just talking to the camera. This particular Ashley Mahoney, she's actually talking to her husband and her children there. I think her mother or mother-in-law was in her book talk. But again, when you post to your Padlet, I'm going to be looking for your name, the audience. Who is this book talk meant for? Are you talking to teachers about a book that they may want to use in class? Are you talking to a student about a book if they liked something, what they might like to read in addition to it? One book for this particular assignment. Okay, doesn't have to be as formal with all the props and things as your final project will. This one can be much more spontaneous. Okay, but if you want to use this for something else, you're welcome to go all out and do props and backdrops. That's up to you. This is also where I would stop to say if you have questions. The template that I give you kind of has everything filled in so that you know what goes in each box. So feel free to clean that out. That is there for you so that you will have it. You will also note the rubric that I will be using to grade it so that you can know what you want to do and make sure you're hitting those target points. Again, the goal of a book talk is to encourage people to want to pick up these books and read them. So show me, tell me what you've got there. Ask questions to get my mind thinking about why I would want to pick up that book and read it, but don't give away the ending. Okay, if I bring up just really quickly I think I have it here, the assignment. Let's go to your book talk here just to review it with you. I have the Padlet linked. Remember, I expect it. Excuse me. I expect it submitted in 2 places, one in Canvas for grading purposes and one right here on the Padlet. It should say Summer 22 at the top. So it has everything here. In your group, or when we come back, we'll present them, and I have a different set of questions for you to kind of look at. But you will create the storyboard and the video. So there's two pieces I'm looking for. Make sure that you turn in both of them. Here are definitions for you. I don't feel like I should have to tell you that out loud again. I feel like I've covered it once. Here is the template for your storyboard here. And here are lots of different examples. I'm actually sharing the Padlet from last semester. Here's one of them. So feel free to check out their book talks, okay? If you have questions, remember, I will be at my computer all day tomorrow. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. And also, lots of times I do want to bring this one out. This particular Amanda here, she did a really great job using just backgrounds and setting to make her book kind of come to life. So think about, you might not always need a prop. You may just need a neat location. So think about that as you're putting together your book talks. Okay. Normally I would also ask if you have any questions, but obviously can't answer those together, but we will definitely do that. If you have any, please send me an email. I'll be here for that. One last request for you for next week is to make sure that you bring a book that has been published in the last year, if at all possible. Next week, we will meet synchronously, and we're going to go over lots of different rules, right? Different resources, really, for how to review a book and where to find reviews for books. So I want you to bring a fairly new book because we're going to get some practice in class next week writing reviews, okay? So we're going to look at that. I look forward to that for next week, and I'll be excited to meet you synchronously. So I hope you have a wonderful week. Have a great time working on these, and I look forward to seeing your responses to your classmates on their award-winning projects. So you have a great night, and I hope to see you very soon. Good night.